Cool. Yes. Hello. So we're going to be talking a bit about the emerging technologies that we're seeing at the moment that are going to have like a pretty big impact, or maybe a pretty big impact on the PC games industry in the next few years. My name's Alex Calvin. I edit PCGamesInsider.biz, which is still media's B2B PC brand. I'm joined today by four wonderful panelists. If you can just go along quickly and introduce yourself, Faye.
G'day, I'm Mike from Hadean. We're a distributed computing company just up the road.
I'm Emily Short at SpiritAI. We do natural language understanding and characters, and I'm also just a few blocks from here.
James Hursthouse. My company's called Greenstone Initiatives, but that's a consulting company. I'm on the panel, I think, because I've been in the industry about 20 years, started off with PC MMOs back in Japan. Recently been focused on a couple of things. One is a company that's doing technology focused around sort of reinventing the cloud for low latency applications. And in conjunction with that, we also have a content play to really leverage that new technology.
Hello, I'm Bruce Grove. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Polystream. We're part of the next wave of cloud gaming. I've been working in this space for more than 10 years now. And Polystream believes that we really have to rethink how we architect and design cloud gaming for the internet. So we're very much building the platform and the protocols that will go behind what we believe will be the next wave of cloud gaming solutions.
Wonderful. We're going to start with a nice broad question because open up discussion a little bit. But I guess over the next 2 years, what do you think is going to be the technology that really has like a measurable impact on the way games are made and distributed, sold? What do you think the technology's what that technology's going to be?
Well, obviously, I'm slightly biased, and I think cloud gaming is going to have
biased in your own way, to be honest.
a big impact. But I also think there's still a lot of lessons to be learned. And a lot of the history of cloud gaming has been blighted by the cost of operation, the scale, and what it takes to actually build a solution that is both something the users want, something the gamers want, but also something that works for the publishers and the developers. And so I think over the next couple of years, as people become more familiar with it and we really move to a world where we do want to use cloud gaming, we do want to see that as a solution. We talk about the Netflix for games. We talk about can we create subscription services, instant demos, no downloads. And I think that we will, over that period of time, we will start to see a big shift in how people think about it, not as a replacement for gaming, but as another part of how we deliver games and how we bring games to the market.
Yeah, no, I think we sort of share that vision. I think, I don't know about 2 years, but certainly, as you look at sort of the rollout of 5G, a lot more server-side processing, what we kind of hope, I guess, is that people really move away from this sense of wanting to own individual copies of games and that they really are sort of always on and always there. I'm not sure really that the Netflix of gaming is necessarily the right analogy, in that really that's just about a sort of distribution mechanism still for the same kinds of standalone games that ultimately get executed on the client. So, I think I was actually just in India this last week talking to the market there, and obviously there's been some rollout now of 4G phones, and it seems to be very mobile focused, but one of the interesting things for me was just the amount of sort of what you would describe as legacy PCs that are actually available in that market. So if obviously, you can begin to use those older PCs as thin clients and have the bulk of the processing done on the server side. I think it sort of activates an old or a slightly legacy PC installed base, which is interesting. So yeah, I think definitely more and more tech that allows us to do much more of the processing required in the data center, and then get it over to the end user.
That actually ties in a little bit to some of what we're doing, but to give a little bit more background, at Spirit, we're doing natural language understanding and understanding of how social interactions evolve, and also text generation, so how people speak to each other. And that's an area where we have seen AI more recently make a lot of progress. It was kind of stalled for a number of decades. What that means from a product perspective is we're building technology that looks at human-to-human interaction. So we're seeing where is there toxicity in this community, where are people treating each other badly, and how can we better mediate MMOs, how can we better mediate communities as a whole so that it's not just on the human moderators to fix that. And then on the character side, the human-to-character interaction, how do we make characters that are able to understand how you've treated them, are able to build a relationship with the player, and then reflect that in gameplay that is really different and specific to the relationship that the player has had with the character in that game. So where that takes us is in the direction of stories that are much more flexible, allow the player a lot more narrative agency where they can really see consequences of what they've done in the past because the characters are able to respond and reflect that back. And then that has effects on kind of what the streaming experience of watching somebody else play. If they're having a very different character experience than you had yourself, it creates kind of an interesting contrast to discuss.
At the risk of sounding redundant, I would tend to agree with the prevalence of the cloud. I think in the context of distributed computing, as we start to move more of the more computationally intensive parts of a game onto the cloud, things like physics, things like AI, it opens up the possibilities from a design perspective. So that's kind of where our company's principal interest is in finding out what people would do if they didn't have the technological constraints that kind of hem them in right now, kind of creating larger, more unbounded worlds that have more complex dynamics and interactions, worlds with a persistent memory. How does that influence the social dynamics of players? How does that influence the player, studio, developer interaction and dynamic as well? I think that leads to a lot of interesting things in PC gaming.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you can get rid of that whole concept of needing to design for the kind of lowest common denominator within the installed base, and be sort of, you know, rest assured that the processing power is there, and then you've got that level of delivery, it really does open up the opportunities for pretty astounding advances in gaming, yeah.
In terms of distribution as well, talking like the cloud, Netflix, or games type, which it's a buzzword I hate, but it serves a very specific purpose. Phil Spencer from Xbox was saying like cloud gaming and sort of subscription services is how Microsoft reaches 2 billion gamers, which is an absolutely enormous audience, really.
I think when we hear stuff like that, and I think this comes back to how do you use the cloud and how do you create distributed compute. But I also think about when we talk about creating new experiences, new engines, what are we using to connect to those experiences? And if we think about using a cloud to create an application that didn't exist, we create this huge open world. We've all got different phones, we've got PCs, we've got tablets, we've got smart TVs. Now we can create new avenues into each of those worlds. We can create new experiences of how we connect with each other, how we talk to each other. Do we use voice or do we use vision? Do we use sound? And that can all come about by creating the cloud platform and then bringing you into those experiences through whatever is the right medium for you at that time. And it's very important that it's focused on you as the user, not always trying to just replace something you have today.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think when we talk about the Netflix of gaming, it's a terrible term, but we all keep saying it. I think that's really just scratching the surface of the potential of what cloud gaming can do, right? In the context of now what the companies are trying to do from a commercial and corporate perspective, it's just about building a player base really quick, right? But I tend to agree with you, Bruce. Having that established platform lets you have more curated, bespoke interactions from a gameplay perspective. That makes it feel like you're not just playing a subpar version of a game outright on your mobile. Right?
For fear of touching the nerve, I'm kind of curious from Bruce, like with how Polystream is using the cloud for games. How's a bit of context? Bruce also worked on Live as well, just the first kind of like quote unquote Netflix for games type service. I'm kind of curious, like what has changed in the intermediate time.
When I look at what a lot of people are building, not a lot. People are still trying to just move your console from your living room into the cloud. And that is not how Microsoft is going to get 2 billion people playing from the cloud. The cloud is a distributed architecture, and each piece of it has a part to play. And we have to think about it like that. If all we do is put game consoles on racks, you'll never get there. And so really it's about, this comes back to, the cloud is a giant compute engine. So how do we make the cloud the console and give everyone a portal into it and create that experience that's built off of the power of the cloud, the scale of the cloud, but also the cost of operation, right? It is really just a physics problem. If you've got a 200-watt computer in your living room and you put that in the cloud, it's very expensive to now build 1 million of those. So it's got to be about rethinking. And I think, again, the Netflix for games is just a distribution. People have caught onto it because they want subscription to work. Forget about that bit for a second and think about how do you build a platform that is appropriate for the environment and the cloud, that is scalable, but has a cost of operation that you can then sell. And then we can create these new experiences as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're working on the technology side of things is the idea of, and we're not unique in this, but the idea of looking at data centers and figuring out how that expense and that cost and that heat, for example, producing clean drinking water from the chillers in a meaningful way. How do you integrate those sorts of things into urban centers so that, the idea of shifting the data center from a sort of monolithic place that's 1,000 miles away into something that's more close to where you want to be, where you want to engage, and then actually figuring out how, some of those power costs and some of those other things that would typically be looked at sort of waste, I guess, would be turned into something more positive within that human existence or the fabric of life, really. Yeah.
I think Bruce, you touched on an interesting point, which is rethinking our approach to this, because fundamentally we're still utilizing a technology stack that we came up with about 40 years ago, right? We just keep cobbling on additional parts to it. There are a lot of inbuilt efficiencies, but people are more focused on trying to figure out, going with the inertia, trying to figure out how we can bend this to the current climate, as opposed to thinking what would be the best solution if we redesign this from the ground up.
Cool. I think we've only got time for like 1 or 2 more questions, I think. But let's quickly just ask Emily, because I've heard a lot in the last few years about the potential of machine learning and AI. You've got people like NVIDIA who are using it to create higher resolution textures off pretty poor older games. But also places like Ubisoft, they're using it to clean up motion capture data. It was one of the examples they gave at GDC last year. Their motion capture data that were taken like 4 hours, I think I was told, to clean up now takes like a minute or between 1 and 4 minutes, I think that's what I was told.
Yeah.
Which like that offloading a lot of that overhead, like that's gonna be like a massive news for the development community.
Yes, yeah, those kinds of advances make a huge difference in what's possible to build. What we're also seeing is some amazing advances in generated performance and generated voice. If you look at some of the recent progress in terms of, especially in the assistant spaces where you see the examples of this most right now, but characters that speak more and more like, they sound like humans, they have breath noises, they have some level of emotional intonation, and obviously we're very sensitive to when that breaks down and how, but that line is moving further and further and creating better and better results, and what that opens up is the possibility of much more dynamic narrative and characters who are able to say generated lines that have not been pre-scripted for them that are responsive to what is the world state, what is going on in this massive sandbox world or this huge multiplayer world in which like lots of historical events, lots of player decisions have created a history for this world that the NPCs now can talk about in a way that you could never do with a hand-authored experience.
Wonderful. I think how long we got left? Sorry. Cool. I guess we've probably got time to get into anything else here. Any questions from the audience at all about emerging technology, about cloud games, about machine learning and AI? Awesome. You've done a good job then, I think. You've explained it all to them so succinctly.
So we did solve everything.
Well, cool. I just want to say a big thank you to my panelists for coming along and giving up their time to talk to us. Have a round of applause for them.